Today, we're going to talk about a war that was completely different from any other. A war fought not with soldiers on a battlefield, but inside the very systems that make a country tick. This is the story of America's first invisible war, a conflict you probably never even knew happened.
For generations, this is what war looked like. It was loud, it was obvious, brutally clear, really. You always knew who the enemy was. But what happens when that battlefield just disappears? When the war starts without making a single sound? I want you to imagine a war that doesn't kick off with a huge bang. Instead, it starts with the quiet hum of a machine slowing down, or a schedule getting thrown off by a single typo. It starts with this creeping, unnerving silence.
And that silence, well, that's what made it so unbelievably terrifying, right? There were no armies pouring over the border, no enemy flags getting planted on some hill. The enemy was like a ghost in the machine, and the only proof that they were even there was a system that was quietly and totally inexplicably starting to fail. So that's the big question, isn't it? When the weapons aren't bullets, but bits of information, and the targets aren't cities, but the supply chains that feed a nation, how in the world do you even begin to fight back? Let's dive in.
So our story doesn't begin with some big declaration of war. No, it starts with a whole series of weird, seemingly random events. These were the very first clues that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with the nation's most critical systems.
Now, if you look at any one of these things by itself, you could just brush it off as an accident. A clerical error here, a mechanical failure there. But when you put them all together, it paints a really disturbing picture. Military supplies weren't just late, they were being sent to the wrong places with pinpoint precision. Key factories weren't just having a bad month, they were being systematically starved of resources. This wasn't chaos, it was a perfectly coordinated, silent attack.
And that leads us to the one person who actually saw the pattern in all this madness. While everybody else was busy looking for soldiers and spies, he got it. He understood that the whole game had changed. This wasn't about fighting, it was about causing a total systemic collapse. So who was this guy? Well, deep in Washington, buried under these mountains of data that nobody else wanted to bother with, there was this lone strategist. He wasn't a general, he wasn't a politician, he was an analyst. And he was about to become the entire country's only line of defense.
Seriously, you have to try and picture this. You've got officials on TV saying everything's fine, that America has no enemies on its own soil. But in some back room, this one guy is charting every single delayed shipment, every factory that goes dark. He's totally on his own, mapping out a war that, according to everyone in charge, simply didn't exist.
And he saw the pattern. It wasn't one giant attack, but a whole cascade of tiny, invisible ones. See, a single number changed in an order form, just one digit, could break a whole supply chain. That broken chain could shut down a factory. And that one factory's failure, well, that could leave an entire military front totally exposed, with no supplies. It was like a line of dominoes, all tipped over by a whisper.
And this was the huge aha moment of the whole thing. The analyst hadn't just found a threat, he'd actually defined a completely new kind of warfare, one that attacked the country's nervous system.
Think about it like this. Traditional war, right? It's all about physical destruction. You use bombs to blow up a city. But systems warfare? Oh, it's so much more subtle. The weapons are just information. The targets aren't armies. They're the supply lines and logistics that keep those armies moving. And the goal isn't to destroy anything. It's just to paralyze everything. So it all boils down to this one terrifying idea: preemptive paralysis. The enemy's whole strategy was to beat America before a single shot could even be fired. By corrupting the systems for supplies and command, they could make the entire military useless without ever having to face them in a fight. This was his big insight, and it sums up the entire philosophy of this new kind of war in just one sentence. I mean, why would you fight a super powerful army head-on when you can just cut its supply lines, empty its weapons depots, and leave it totally stranded? America's greatest strength, its amazing industrial efficiency, had just been turned into its biggest weakness.
Okay, so you've just uncovered this terrifying new reality. How do you possibly fight back? Our lone strategist knew he couldn't use bombs or guns. He had to fight a systems war with systems. But first, he had to get permission.
So he goes to his superiors, lays out this whole invisible war, and he gets completely shut down. They denied him everything he asked for. The official channels were a dead end. To them, if there wasn't an invading army, there was no proof of a war. They were still stuck fighting the last war, totally blind to the one that was happening right under their noses. So what does he do? He becomes a ghost inside the system himself. He builds this secret network, not of spies and commandos, but of ordinary people who are on the front lines of this invisible war. The clerks who saw a weird change in an order, the rail operators who questioned why a train was being rerouted. His team wasn't built on rank, it was built on trust.
And this is where it gets really brilliant. This is how they fought back. They didn't try to stop the enemy, they used the enemy's own tactics against them. They'd put in fixed supply orders to try and bait the saboteurs. They would allow small, controlled failures to happen just to prevent the really catastrophic ones. It was like they were playing a game of chess in complete darkness.
So, how does a war like this actually end? Well, not with a bang, that's for sure. A war with no explosions also means a victory with no parades.
And then, just like that, it was over. The attacks just stopped. The enemy's network was exposed on the inside and taken apart, but they were never called out publicly. The war was won in total silence. And the guy who won it? He was quietly reassigned, his incredible work buried in classified files, totally forgotten by history.
But here's the thing, his work didn't just vanish. In fact, it became the literal foundation of modern national security. Every time you hear about protecting supply chains, or cybersecurity for our infrastructure, or strategic logistics, it all goes back to the lessons that were learned in this very first invisible war. He didn't just win a secret conflict, he basically wrote the rulebook for the next 100 years of defense.
And these were his own words, written in a sealed report long before anybody else had a clue what was going on. He knew he wasn't just fixing a problem for today, he was looking way ahead, getting the country ready for a future where battles would be fought not with armies, but with foresight, and with data, and with code. And that leaves us with one last kind of chilling question, doesn't it? His war was fought in train schedules and factory orders. But today, our world is infinitely more connected, right? It's run by global financial systems, energy grids, digital networks, all of it. So it makes you wonder, where are the battlefields now? And who is the new lone analyst sitting in some quiet room, just starting to notice the first signs of trouble?